Today, of all days, Aleksandr Dugin accepted my Facebook friend request. This was made a few months ago. It must have been probably in the middle of last year, I think. And I guess he's probably not a frequent visitor of Facebook. But today, of all days, because of the military action that Putin took in Ukraine, uh, things are obviously changing quite quickly. Why do I mention Dugin? It is because he is a thinker, a political scientist. He is called a Russian philosopher, political analyst, and a strategist. He was the main organizer of the National Bolshevik Party, National Bolshevik Front, and the Eurasia Party. Now, it's a little problematic, I think, for all these parties to just pop up. I haven't read this entry of Dugin before, but I mean, obviously, you do have to join a few parties and then you get kicked out of them, and, in order to really just find out the lie of the land. And Dugin has more or less taken the same path as me, joining different parties, finding their culture toxic and unproductive, and saying so and being moved on, I guess. Anyway, he wrote more than 30 books, among them Foundations of Geopolitics, and so he has many political ideas. And I believe he was kicked off Twitter or something. The Americans like to think he is some terrible person, but I've listened to a few of his streams on YouTube, and I really don't think he's that radical. He's not even promoting an idea that you can really put your finger on. It's, I have tried more than once, and I'm still left with a slightly puzzled feeling about, well, what was he on about? So we know he's a dabbler. He joined an avant-garde dissident group. He learned to speak Italian, German, French, and English. He discovered the writings of Julius Evola. So obviously he's widely read, and he's interested in ideas beyond those found in Russia. Now, from the little I know about Russia, which is now technically a liberal democracy after listening to the Americans in the 80s, they are in a bit of trouble, and they will be permanently weakened. And this is something that the West could learn from, because if Putin, in my view, if Putin were being really ruthless, he'd become a one-party state. And that would, yes, create a few problems, because people will be worried about, how things were like in the Soviet Union. And this would raise further questions about why China is still practicing communism, while Russia didn't. I mean, obviously, different countries have different histories, and this is actually a question I asked myself some time ago about why China is still persisting with communism while Russia has given it up, and maybe Russia should have kept it up, but obviously they couldn't, because, well, the Soviet Union collapsed. And you can say, well, it's because they kept practicing communism, and that's why they collapsed. So look at them now. They're now a liberal democracy. And this should really be approved of by the Americans. I mean, what else could they do? I mean, they've done all they can to do what they think the Americans want them to do, but it's never enough. They actually became a liberal democracy. There is even a party called the Liberal Party. And I don't think Russians feel that a democracy is, that great. And this coincides with the time when Westerners don't think democracy is that great either. And I would have to declare myself and say, I favour a one-party state. And although I am aware of the abuses that could happen under the system, I have actually thought of how to get round this. And I'm not going to tell you what it is until somebody of sufficient moral and intellectual stature engages with me on this. Now, I really do think I have the solutions, and I know they're quite bold and radical solutions, and today is the day to mention it because it will be a momentous day when, things will get rapidly worse in the West, and I just want to bookmark the day and say, look, I have these solutions to your problems, and somebody should at least check them out, instead of leaving me to engage with only people who are not terribly serious, who use fake funny names and, will have no accountability for what they do. So this is what I'd like to do. I would like to engage with somebody of sufficient moral and intellectual stature and to go through my ideas with them. I know things are going to change anyway because things are going to get rapidly worse. And I have already today predicted that Russia will be blamed for anything bad that happens in the West. But it won't actually change the beliefs of ordinary citizens who have, for quite a while before the Ukraine crisis, suspected their governments of not knowing what they're doing and not acting in the national interest. So I mentioned Dugin because he is considered to be a feared figure because he doesn't quite approve of liberal democracy, but then neither do I approve of liberal democracy. I think it's unnecessarily divisive, and it's more than our incompetent politicians can cope with because we already know they're a bit stupid, and if you force them to overload themselves with, having to be nice and telling all these lies, and they can't remember which lies they've told, and they get all the rules wrong. It's not going to create a very good impression. And my proposal is to keep things simple and to make politicians feel that they are in control of the situation because they understand the rules and the rules are not going to change. And it is for this reason that I propose the Quran. And I know that it is not exactly felt to be a tradition of the West, but the fact that, the thing is, it is arguably Western in that many principles of the English legal system come from Sharia. Some years ago, I saw Anjan Chowdhury when before he was imprisoned. He did one of those lectures about Sharia, and he basically explained it in the same way that a first-year law student would have the English legal system explained to him. And I thought, wow, how, what a coincidence. And then I thought about it some more, and then I realized that really most legal systems would have the same generic ideas such as, tradition, precedent, and reasoning by analogy, and, and a hierarchy of legal authority and, seniority of courts, bound by statute and, case law. So I think this is, just part and parcel of the makeup of any legal system. And seeing the similarities between Sharia and the English legal system, you could argue that, all legal systems really come from uh, uh, the Islamic Sharia system, because it's only natural that you would be referring to the wording of the law and having different rules of interpretation for different kinds of law. And you would also have, well, yes, ideas like precedents, case law, and the meaning of words, and all the usual things that go into the discussion of any um, legally of legal training. So, as we can see from Dugin, he joined these political parties in the hope of fighting himself. And one of them was called the Eurasia Party. So, Eurasianism was one of the things I remember him being spoken about. And obviously, because Russia is also an empire, they would have to talk about cultural diversity. So I'll look up what New Eurasianism means. Eurasianism is a political movement in Russia that posits that Russian civilization does not belong in the European or Asian categories, but instead to the geopolitical concept of Eurasia. Originally developing in the 1920s, um, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Neo-Eurasianism when really I should be looking at Eurasianism. Originally developing in the 1920s, the movement was supportive of the Bolshevik Revolution, but not its stated goals of enacting communism, seeing the Soviet Union as a stepping stone on the path to creating a new national identity that would reflect the unique character of Russia's geopolitical position. The movement saw a minor resurgence after the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the 20th century and is mirrored by Turanism in Turkic and Finnic nations. So I haven't heard of that. So let's have a look at Neo-Eurasianism. Neo-Eurasianism is a Russian school of thought which gained a following in Russia during the years leading to the collapse of the Soviet Union and in the period afterwards. It considers Russia to be culturally closer to Asia than to Western Europe. So basically it's a rejection of liberal democracy. That's what he wants to do. Some strange words such as ethnogenesis and passionarity. But anyway, the Americans don't like it because it's, well, against liberal democracy. So, political scientist Anton Chekhov defined Dugin's version of Neo-Eurasianism as a form of fascist ideology centered on the idea of revolutionizing the Russian society and building a totalitarian Russian-dominated Eurasian empire that would challenge and eventually defeat its eternal adversary, represented by the United States and its Atlanticist allies, thus bringing about a new golden age of global and political and cultural liberalism. I guess we can guess, who might be paying Chekhov's paychecks. So we can read between the lines here and tell that Dugin is moving towards China. He likes the idea of the one-party state, and I'm putting it to Americans that the one-party state is not just a horrible Eastern idea, but something that Washington himself supported. So if we can all agree to have a one-party state with a proper protection for the rights of party members, we should be okay. So now that we know that the Western political establishment is collapsing under the weight of its own incompetence and hypocrisy, it is surely time that on today of all days we consider the imminence of regime change. I mean, obviously, the political classes will have something in mind, whatever it is. But we too should consider what kind of government that we would like to have. Obviously, we would like a government that governs in the national interest and is capable of having personnel who can give a good show of governing us well and saying things that make sense and not doing things that are obviously contrary to the national interest. And I know they don't think much of our intelligence, but what we'd like is to not feel stupid. That's it. We don't want to feel stupid. We don't want to feel stupid compared to China or stupid compared to Iran or stupid compared to Russia, who have leaders who govern in the national interest and they do things that make sense and are popular at home and are even understandable by the citizens of its rival empires. So the important thing is really to be able to give a good impression of governing well. And this was what Dugin was trying to do. So he explored all these different ideas. He rejected liberal democracy, quite right too. This is my position as well. But wouldn't it be perfect if we all adopted the same system of principles from the highest possible source? I mean, what's wrong with that? Theocracy has been called third position because it is neither capitalism nor communism, and there's nothing more an embodiment of the idea of being neither capitalism nor communism as the theocracy of based on the Quran. And this is really what I propose. Obviously, I propose it under my own interpretation, and obviously I won't be able to control the interpretation, but only give, I'm only in a position to give a few suggestions, and this is what, it will work out under, I think, when, should every country in the world adopt it, they would be interpreting it in a slightly different way, as we already know would happen if each of the 50 states of America were allowed to adopt and interpret and apply secular Koranism in their own way. So if we do that, then all the different countries in the world would feel that they retain the interpretation, and it's important that they do, because if you say, oh, they've got to have this interpretation only, they would just reject it. So the Quran is actually enormously flexible as a way of governing your country, and you could just be a monoracial nation, such as perhaps Japan, or you could be an empire like China or Russia or even America, or you could be just a little ethno-state like Israel, and you could all be interpreting it in a slightly different way, but still coming under that same umbrella and recognizably being in harmony with these Islamic principles. So I really don't see why we shouldn't talk about it more. And in particular, I think the media of any country that feels that the West is, not presenting its best side to the world, shall we say, because they are suffering from the symptoms of dementia and amnesia and just neurosis generally, and but not in a good way. And they're about to have, rising prices and very angry people wondering what the hell the government thinks it's doing, starting fights in the Ukraine, and thereby making prices go higher. So those of us who live in the West should have a care and, have a think about how they would prefer their country to be run. We don't think it's being run properly because nobody seems to be able to state a position that is in harmony with reality and also in harmony with the national interest. So let us continue with Dugin, who isn't as scary as as these people try to make him out to be. Obviously, in Russia, there will be Atlanticists who want to be American, who thinks it's cool to be like America, but it's not. And surely the last few years have shown how hollow is the feat of their clay idol that is representative democracy in the West. So I basically scrolled. Okay, sorry, I'm still on Eurasianism. I need to go down the entry on Dugin. So basically, he's suspicious of the Americans. In fact, that's actually quite a long section on Ukraine, which I haven't read before. Today has been a day of discovery for me. So he's a great fan of Putin. His 2007 quote, "There are no more opponents of Putin's cause. And if there are, they are mentally ill and need to be sent off for clinical examination." Putin is everywhere. Putin is everything. Putin is absolute. And Putin is indispensable. Was voted number 2 in flattery by readers of Kommersant. In the Kremlin, Dugin represents the War Party, a division within the leadership over Ukraine. Dugin is the author of Putin's initiative for the annexation of Crimea by Russia. He considered the war between Russia and Ukraine to be inevitable and appealed for Putin to start intervening in the war in Donbass. Dugin said, "The Russian Renaissance can only stop by Kiev." During the 2014 pro-Russian conflict in Ukraine, Dugin was in regular contact with pro-Russian separatist insurgents. He described his position as unconditionally pro-DPR and pro-LPR. These are the Donetsk and Lugansk, I think. A Skype video call posted on YouTube showed Dugin providing instructions to separatists of south and eastern Ukraine, as well as advising Ekaterina Gubareva, whose husband Pavel Gubarev declared himself the Donetsk region governor, and after that was arrested by the Security Service of Ukraine. On 31st March 2014, Oleg Bakhtiarov, a member of the Eurasia Youth Union of Russia founded by Dugin, was arrested. He had trained a group of about 200 people to seize parliament and another government building according to the Security Service of Ukraine. Dugin stated he was disappointed in Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying that Putin did not aid the pro-Russian insurgents in Ukraine after the Ukrainian army's early 2014 offensive. In August 2014, Dugin called for an eradication of Ukrainian identity. Oh, very hard line. Holia Koinash of the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group said the influence of Dugin's Eurasian ideology on events in eastern Ukraine and on Russia's invasion of the Crimea was beyond any doubt. According to Vincent Joubert, Dugin's radical ideology became the basis of the internal and foreign policy of the Russian authorities. So Dugin is worth listening to in order to understand to which fate the Kremlin is leading its country and the whole of Europe. Ukraine gave Dugin a 5-year entry ban starting in June 2006, and Kiev declared him a persona non grata in 2007. His Eurasian Youth Union was banned in Ukraine. In 2007, the Security Service of Ukraine identified persons of the Eurasian Youth Union who committed vandalism on Hovelar in 2007. They climbed up the mountain of Hovelar, imitated sawing down the details of the construction in the form of the small coat of the arms of Ukraine by tools brought with them, and painted the emblem of Eurasian Youth Union on the memorial symbol of the Constitution of Ukraine. He was deported back to Russia when he arrived at Simferopol International Airport in June 2007. Before war broke out between Russia and Georgia in 2008, Dugin visited South Ossetia and predicted, "Our troops will occupy the Georgian capital, Tbilisi, the entire country, and perhaps even Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula, which is historically part of Russia anyway." Afterwards, he said, Russia should not stop at liberating South Ossetia, but should move further, and we have to do something similar in Ukraine. In 2008, Dugin stated that Russia should repeat the Georgian scenario in Ukraine, namely attack it. In September 2008, after the Russian-Georgian war, he did not hide his anger towards Putin, who dared not drop the other shoe and restore the empire. On 10th October 2014, Dugin said, "Only after restoring the Greater Russia, that is, the Eurasian Union, we can become a credible global player." Now, these processes slowed down very much. The Ukrainian Maidan was the response of the West to the advance of the Russian integration. He described the Euromaidan as a coup d'etat carried out by the United States. America wishes to wage the war against Russia not by its own hands, but by the hands of the Ukrainians, promising to wink at up to 10,000 victims among the peaceful population of Ukraine, and actually demanding the victims the United States led to this war. The United States carried out the coup d'etat during the Maidan for the purpose of this war. The United States raised neo-Nazi Russophobes to the power for the purpose of this war. Dugin said Russia is a major driving force for the current events in Ukraine. Russia insists on its sovereignty, its liberty responds to challenges thrown down to it. For example, in Ukraine, Russia is attempting to integrate post-Soviet space. As Israeli political scientists Vyacheslav Likhatov states, if one seriously takes the fact that such a person as Alexander Dugin is the ideologist of the imperial dash for the West, then one can establish that Russia is not going to stop as far as the Atlantic Ocean. Well, that's a bit exaggerated. I mean, Russia is an ancient empire. It's lost some territories recently and understandably would like to get it back. In the 2014 article by Dmitry Bykov, YTV Alexander Dugin and Galina Pishnyak crucified a boy. Channel 1 Russia's use of the air story by Dugin and Pishnyak about the allegedly crucified boy as a pretext for escalating the conflict was compared to a case of Baileys. I don't know what this means. On 9th July 2014, Dugin on his Facebook account wrote a story that a 6-year-old child was allegedly nailed down to the advertisement board and shot to death before his father's eyes. On 16 July 2014, Novaya Gazeta provided a videotape of its correspondent, Eugen Feldman, walking along the main square in Sloviansk, asking local old women if they had heard of the murder of the child. They said such an event did not take place. The website change.org hosted a petition of citizens who demanded a comprehensive investigation with identification involved in the fabrication of the plot. On 2nd October 2014, Dugin described the situation in Donbass. The humanitarian crisis has long since been raging on the territory of Novorossiya. Already up to 1 million, if not more, refugees are in the Russian Federation. A large part of the inhabitants of the DPR and the LPR simply moved abroad. In the end of October 2014, Dugin advised the separatists to establish dictatorship in Novorossiya until they win in the confrontation. Dugin made contact with the French far-right thinker Alain de Benoist in 1990. What did he say? The name is familiar. Ethno-nationalist think tank. All right. Around the same time, he also met the Belgian Jean-Francois Thirat and Yves Lacoste. In 1992, he invited some of the European far-right figures he had met into Russia. He has also brought members of Jobbik and Golden Dawn to Russia in order to strengthen their ties to the country, according to the book War for Eternity by Benjamin R. Teitelbaum. Dugin met Steve Bannon in Rome 2018 to discuss Russia's geopolitical relationships with the United States and China, as well as traditionalist philosophy. Dugin also developed links with the far-right and far-left political parties in the European Union, including Syriza in Greece, Ataka in Bulgaria, the Freedom Party of Austria, and Front National in France, to influence EU policy on Ukraine and Russia. Dugin is also closely aligned with Israeli journalist Avigdor Eskin, who previously served on the board of Dugin's Eurasia Party. Doesn't really sound that shocking to me. Fifth column. The typical rhetoric about the fifth column as foreign agents is used by Dugin for political accusations in many publications. So many unpronounceable names. So he's basically just, saying that there's a fifth column in Russia and they're acting on the instructions of the Americans. Okay, I'll read the whole thing. Just just because all these ideas are unfamiliar and the names too. In his 2014 interview published by Pravda and something else with too many consonants, he said, a huge struggle is being conducted, and of course Europe has its own fifth column, its own Bolotonaya square minded people, and if we have them sitting idly and doing nasty things in Dozd, Europe is indeed dominated and ruled by the fifth column in full swing. This is the same American riffraff. He sees the United States standing behind all the scenes, including the Russian fifth column. According to the statement, the danger of our fifth column is not that they are strong, they are absolutely paltry, but that they are hired by the greatest godfather of the modern world, by the United States. That is why they are effective. They work, they are listened to, they get away with anything because they have the world power standing behind them. He sees the US Embassy as the center for funding and guiding the fifth column and asserts, we know that the fifth column receives money and instructions from the American Embassy. According to Dugin, the fifth column promoted the breakup of the Soviet Union as a land continental construction, seized power under Boris Yeltsin, and headed Russia as the ruling politico economic and cultural elite until the 2000s. The fifth column is the regime of liberal reformers of the 1990s and include former Russian oligarchs Vladimir Kuczynski and Boris Berezovsky, former government officials Mikhail Kasyanov, Boris Nemtsov, Vladimir Ryzhkov, artistic, cultural and media workers, the Echo of Moscow, the Russian State University of the Humanities, the highest ranks of the National Research University, Higher School of Economics, a significant part of teachers of the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and a minority part of teachers of the Moscow State University. Such a long sentence, I don't know what it was about to begin with. Okay, so he says all the fifth columnists are in these places that I've just read you. Dugin proposes to deprive the fifth column of Russian citizenship and deport the group from Russia. I believe it is necessary to deport the fifth column and deprive them of their citizenship. However, in 2007, Dugin argued there are no longer opponents of Putin's policy, and if there are, they are mentally ill and should be sent to prophylactic health examination. In 2014, Dugin, in an interview to Der Spiegel, confirmed that he considers the opponents of Putin to be mentally ill. In one of his publications, Dugin introduced a team, the sixth column, and defined it as the fifth column, which just pretends to be something different. He's got a sense of humor. Those who are in favor of Putin but demand that he stand for liberal values as opposed to the liberal fifth column, which is specifically against Putin. Okay, so the sixth column is basically people who say they're for Putin but want him to be in favor of liberal values. And this he calls them the sixth column. During the 2014 Russian military intervention in Ukraine, Dugin said that all the Russian sixth columns stood up staunchly for Ukrainian oligarch Rinat Akhmetov. As he asserts, we need to struggle against the fifth and sixth columns. Russian-American artist Mikhail Hemyakin says Dugin is inventing the sixth column. Soon, probably, there will already be the seventh one as well. The fifth column is understandable. This is we intelligentsia, lousy, dirty, who read Camus. And the sixth column, in his opinion, is more dangerous because that is the personal entourage of Vladimir Putin. But he is naive and understands nothing. And as for As for Dugin, he can tell him who to shoot to death and who to imprison, maybe Kudrin and maybe Medvedev. According to Dugin, the whole internet should be banned. I think that internet as such, as a phenomenon, is worth prohibiting because it gives nobody anything good. In June 2012, Dugin said in a lecture that chemistry and physics are demonic sciences and that all Orthodox Russians need to unite around the president of Russia in the last battle between good and evil, following the example of Iran and North Korea. He added, if we want to liberate ourselves from the West, it is needed to liberate ourselves from the textbooks of physics and chemistry. Well, well, well. But Dugin himself got cancelled. Loss of department headship. During the conflict in Ukraine, Dugin also lost the offered post head of the Department of Sociology of International Relations of the Faculty of Sociology of the Moscow State University, while being deputy head since 2009. So basically, 10,000 people sent it to the Moscow State University. The petition was started after Dugin's interview, in which he said, in relation to pro-Russian activists burned in a building in Odessa on May 2nd, 2014. But what we see on May 2nd is beyond any limits. Kill them, kill them, kill them. There should not be any more conversations. As a professor, I consider it so. While he was talking about those who perpetrated lawlessness on May the 2nd, media interpret this as a call to kill Ukrainians. Dugin claimed to have been fired from this post. The university claimed the offer of the position of the department head resulted from a technical error and was therefore cancelled, and that he would remain professor and deputy department head under contract until September 2014. Dugin wrote the statement of resignation from the faculty staff to be appointed to the Moscow State University due to the offered position of department head. But since the appointment was cancelled, he was no longer a staff member of the faculty nor a staff member of the Moscow State University. Okay, something complicated. I don't really get it, but anyway, he got cancelled. Okay. So he's just advocating a more gung-ho territory. He absolutely rejects representative democracy, which he sees as something that would undermine the integrity of the Russian Federation. I mean, yeah, that's not controversial, is it? So I'm really saying that if there's going to be a change in the world order, it should be along the lines of secular Koranism, which is really, I like to think it is, the best of your culture, supported by the hypothetical supreme authority. Yeah, I mean, why not do that? And thereby prevent war. Instead of, lurching around, making rules up as you go along that you know are going to get you into trouble. So, I don't think he sounds terribly scary. I just don't think he does. I mean, all the bad stuff when he said about certain people, they were quoted out of context. But anyway, he's subject to sanctions by the Americans. So on 11th March 2015, the United States Department of the Treasury added Dugin to its list of Russian citizens who are sanctioned as a result of their involvement in the Ukrainian crisis. His Eurasian Youth Union was targeted too. In June 2015, Canada added Dugin to its list of sanctioned individuals. So let's have a look at Dugin's books. So he wrote something called Political Platonism, and then Ethnos and Society, Ethnosociology. I can see it's getting racial. He's also into Martin Heidegger, the philosophy of another beginning. A title was Last War of the World Island, the Geopolitics of Contemporary Russia. Putin versus Putin. The United States and the New World Order. The Fourth Political Theory. Eurasian Mission, an introduction to Neo-Eurasianism. Pop culture. All right. Okay, I'll go. There are not that many comments this time. People, okay, SR171 Blackbird says people are literally dying, but you want to talk about some way of life. How about wanting life to be prolonged? Well, what are you on about? How would I know how to prolong life? I'm not a doctor. Okay, I don't know what you're talking about. So Dugin is basically a political thinker and a strategist. This is kind of what I want to be, really. I would be good for the transition from matriarchy to theocracy, and you'll know I'm getting somewhere if you see me on mainstream media explaining my ideas, and I well understand that there's a certain resistance to my ideas, and also that people don't particularly want to accept my ideas because it is so radically different to what Westerners understand their own culture and political system to be. So I totally get it. But what I'm about is universalizing nationalism. So I am saying that at some time, citizens of any nation would be called upon to make sacrifices for their country, higher taxes, fighting off some invasion or whatever. And you'd have to be able to justify, this additional inconvenience to their lives on their better nature. Unfortunately, in the West, the relationship of trust and respect no longer exists because Western governments have tried the patience of their own citizenry too much. So they no longer believe in anything you say, and that's why things are, so hard. So what has this got to do with what's happening in the Ukraine today? Apparently the Russians are invading Ukraine. The talk is that it'll take about, a week to clear up, and what I heard is that Russia is merely pressing its advantage. If it can easily destroy the army of the Ukrainians, and it's going to do that. It's going to basically disable the Ukrainians and denazify them, and basically deal with all their troublemakers, and just yeah, do that. And this is bound to upset America and its poodles, and they'll just be whinging at Putin, as well as this chap Dugin and Putin. But we too must consider our political system, which is obviously failed, because all we ever do is complain about the hypocrites and cowards and incompetents that are in charge of the ship of state. But if you want to get rid of the system, we have to give them an alternative that they can imagine themselves using. There's no point complaining to them, and when they ask, well, what do you want? And you can't really say anything that doesn't make you sound stupid. And so what I advise is forging forward with secular Koranism. Oh, so we have secular Koranism in Russia, eh? How funny. Well done for using the Google Translate. I'm checking this out myself. So how are we going to get our way? I'm afraid there is no other way other than to speak clearly and briefly so that people get what we are saying. And if you think you I think a lot of the problem is that people think they can get away with not really saying anything, or it's like they say it in a way that isn't understood, and then asked to be congratulated on the fact that they've said it, but actually nobody understood it. That's why they didn't react and get angry. I'm just checking if you got it correctly. Yeah, I think you put in secular Quran and it didn't quite come out that way. I'll put it in the post it in the chat for you. I've got some new people who don't know what secular Koranism is. It's Sharia as I interpret it. Welcome, new people. So what I'm saying is that the West ought to have some nationalist thinkers, right? So the Russians have got Dugin, and obviously he's made himself well known to the extent that there are Westerners who admire him. And I think all Western nations should have a little think about what kind of political system they ought to have that isn't liberal democracy, because let's face it, nobody wants it anymore, not even the Americans. The Americans are just, they don't like it, do they? We know they don't like it. And they're trying to reject it, and those who claim to like it are only just distorting it to say, oh, look, it's still liberal democracy, but it isn't any longer. And so this is what I suggest for all European nations, that they have a good think about what kind of government they want to have under what moral system. And I'm saying that there's only one, rational and moral choice. All right, I think I've said enough. Thank you all for listening. Let's hope secular Koranism gets heard about and discussed and maybe adopted in, well, lots of different countries around the world to make this place a better place.